Chris Lee and Blake Lovell of Southeastern 14 here. We are previewing every single SEC game all year. We are in week 6. Kentucky coming off a disappointing loss at Ole Miss is hosting South Carolina, which walloped South Carolina State, I believe 51-10. This game kicks off 7:30 Eastern, I believe, on the SEC Network. Blake, this is a weird matchup for reasons I'll get into later. Both teams have got some glaring issues that the other one will look to expose, but I'm wondering in both cases if either team can do that.
Yeah, we'll see. Kentucky coming off a loss in a game that felt like it should have won, had its opportunities. We talked about the turnovers, just the missed opportunities that were there for them. So what's Kentucky's mindset coming into this one? That's certainly a fair question. Meanwhile, South Carolina, I think, is still one of those couple teams in the SEC that I just don't know what to make of to this point. They've played, Chris, 5 games now, and I still have a great feel of what South Carolina is, because they've beaten Charlotte, they've beaten South Carolina State, they've beaten Georgia State, but, the 2 SEC games they've lost, one a bit more, convincing than the other in terms of the Georgia and the Arkansas game. So, this is another one where, I don't know. I think looking at South Carolina's offense and what they can do against Kentucky's defense, that's certainly one of the big questions here. And again, for Kentucky, I think it's just limiting those mistakes. So,
Well, what South Carolina is on offense is prone to throwing interceptions. Gamecocks have thrown 9 so far. They're averaging 35.8 points. Kentucky giving up 14.9. On pass plays, adjusting for sacks, South Carolina averaging 6.9 yards per play. Kentucky giving up 6.4 per pass play. Gamecocks averaging 5.1 per rush. Kentucky giving up 5.4 for rush. Again, those adjusted for sacks. I know Kentucky played without a key defender. I think Jones missed the game last week. Man, I don't know. I've got some doubts about Kentucky's offense we'll get to in a minute, but feels like Kentucky could be a nightmare for Rattler in terms of this game is at home and he's making a lot of mistakes. And South Carolina also has been sacked 10 times for 77 yards, although Kentucky has not generated a huge pass rush so far, just 1.2 sacks a game.
Yeah, 2 interceptions in 3 of the first 5 games. Again, 2 against South Carolina State, 2 against Georgia State, 2 against Georgia, and the other against Arkansas. So yeah, I mean, the fact that you haven't had those kind of clean performances, it's certainly something that I think if you're South Carolina, that stands out, and if you're Kentucky, you're kind of salivating at the thought of forcing those turnovers and making it much easier on your offense, which we'll talk about them in a minute. That aside from mistakes, you get one of your best players back. So I think that's the big key here for Kentucky's defense is forcing those mistakes. And like you said, it's been a South Carolina team that I think clearly at this point, they're going to throw the ball, but we've talked about kind of their rushing attack too, and maybe not giving enough credit to that. But I think in some of those games, the thing is, these last 2 specifically, right? I mean, they've just kind of strolled to victories in terms of putting up a lot of points. And I think the running game will certainly be important here too, because that's one of the things we saw. We know kind of what Ole Miss's rushing attack was against Kentucky and kind of the options they had to work with there. If you look on the other side here for South Carolina, I think you certainly want to try to lean on Lloyd here and see what they can do with that. But otherwise, those turnovers on the road in an SEC game, any game, but especially in this setting, I think making those turnovers against this Kentucky defense, Rattler just can't do that. So that is certainly priority number 1 for that offense.
Lots of big games coming up this week in the SEC to add some extra excitement. We will be making predictions in the Stakes app. We want to hear from you guys. If you agree or disagree, go to playwithstakes.com/14. That is STAKES. Sign up for Stakes. Place your predictions, whether you're for our picks or against them. If you use the invite code Southeastern14 when you sign up, you'll get a double welcome bonus. Always free to play. This is just for fun, free to sign up, free to place bets. You don't win or lose any money. You just get NFTs or your tokens that you can exchange for NFTs. Cool game. Lots of fun. So join us there. Okay, Blake, last week I was concerned about Kentucky against Ole Miss because of the blocking element. And it sort of manifested itself in a different way. I was worried about the running game, but Kentucky now has given up 19 sacks. And there was a key one in that game late that forced a turnover. When Kentucky's got the ball, Kentucky averaging 26.8 points, Carolina giving up 27.2. Kentucky averaging, if you adjust for sacks per pass play, that goes way down from about 10 yards per pass play to 8. South Carolina adjusting for sacks, giving up 6.4 per pass play. Kentucky adjusted for sacks. Rushing average goes up a little bit from what's on paper. 3.6 yards a carry. Carolina giving up 4.6. Carolina doesn't have much of a pass rush, Blake. 4 sacks all year. And I'm thinking that's where Kentucky is vulnerable, is if you can beat up their offensive line, get to Levis, force turnovers. Just not something Carolina's done so far.
That's the issue here. And I think if you sit back and Kentucky goes through this game with a clean sheet and has no turnovers, Kentucky's going to win this game, because that means the offense will have, again, put themselves in a situation. And when you add in the fact that we think that there's certainly a possibility that South Carolina turns the ball over a time or two in this one, that also sets up, perhaps easy possessions for this Kentucky offense. I think, we talked about the return of Chris Rodriguez. That was a tough matchup against Ole Miss. He was still able to kind of show that, the impact he can have. I think he'll have even more of an impact here in this game. I think too, there's something about Will Levis and kind of wanting to have a bounce back game here. I mean, he's taken a lot of criticism, as we've seen, coming out of that Ole Miss game for just a couple of those things. But like you said, Chris, I think a lot of that criticism can be pointed towards the offensive line.
Well, Carolina does have 7 picks. They're not coming off generating a pass rush. I mean, Cam Smith's a very good cornerback, one of the best in the country. So there is that. I don't have the breakdown in front of me of how many of those have come against Charlotte and South Carolina State and how many have come against the rest. So there is some caution there on Kentucky's end that Carolina can force some turnovers. But to me, Blake, you're looking at the point spread. It's about 10.5 at the over-under. So Vegas thinks this is about a 29-19 final. I don't have a strong feeling one way or the other than I feel like there's probably going to be maybe a few more points in this game. I don't know why I feel that way. I do feel like Levis is due for a bounce back. I don't know. I'm kind of liking Kentucky in 10.5, but I don't know that I would touch this one.
I think I would. South Carolina 0-4 against the spread in their last 4 road games. All these numbers via covers, by the way. Kentucky 6-1-1 against the spread in their last 8 games going back to last season. I think they've covered 4 or 5 times this year to this point. Kentucky has the matchup itself. South Carolina 0-4 against the spread in their last 4 games at Kentucky. South Carolina 1-8 against the spread in the last 9 meetings between these two teams. So if I'm going to bank on the trends, that tells me to probably pick Kentucky here. Although, like you said, that number at double digits now, 10.5, that's maybe like it a little bit more if it was a 10. But 10.5, I think, again, you're banking on Kentucky coming out and kind of bouncing back after that one. But we always say that can go a couple different ways. You could have a hangover effect, and maybe South Carolina finds a little momentum offensively. I just don't see that, maybe, based on what we've seen to this point. Because I think going up against Kentucky's defense will present some challenges for them. But I think the bigger issue is that I think Kentucky's offense will be able to kind of do their thing here and be able to put up some points. So, yeah, I'll take Kentucky to win, of course. Covering, again, the trends seem to suggest they will be able to do that, given the series history and some of the recent trends between these two teams. So that's kind of probably another one you could lean towards if you're looking at it that way.
Okay, we are covering every SEC game this week. Don't forget to visit our sponsor, Stakes. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button so you don't miss any of these. Thanks for watching. We'll see you soon.